After an entire decade of Five Nights at Freddy's, there's a lot of lore to unpack that millions of theorists have tried to solve, although I think I've actually solved it all. Today is the third part of this miniseries, where we're solving Five Nights at Freddy's 3 from 2015, including the biggest question: who, what, when, where, and why is Happiest Day? Each month will be dedicated to a single game until the big timeline video releasing December 19th at 5 PM UTC. So please subscribe so you don't miss an upload, and for us to hit 300k before the end of the year, like the video and consider becoming a channel member if you enjoy. But in order to figure out which story I'm going to tell there, let's begin solving the timeline here. Although remember, as always, this is just a theory and my interpretation of the evidence. Even if you disagree, I hope it at least gives you something new to think about. So as we all know, we play as an unnamed security guard in an attraction being hosted at a local amusement park, Fazbear's Fright, a haunted house-esque experience, all based on the rumours and myths surrounding Fazbear's past. This attraction is set up by a new instructor character named Phone Dude, as well as his team, the size of which is unknown. The place being set to open the week following the game, this actually being a common misconception within the community. This location never actually got to open. Note the game's opening newspaper being a coming soon announcement, and the Phone Dude outright stating,
like the attraction opens in like a week.
Either way, and prior to the gameplay, their team had been salvaging whatever they could from the previous Fazbear locations to make the place feel like an authentic Freddy's location. From Fredbear's family diner memorabilia, arcade machines from the first ever Freddy's, and the leftover shells from the scrap toys, as well as the mysterious emptied classics. Although on your first night, as the gameplay begins, Phone Dude mentions that they talked to an architect for the buildings, who mentioned an extra room that got boarded up. This room being called a safe room. A room that was featured in each and every building that was off camera, invisible to all animatronics, and was where Fredbear and Spring Bonnie were retired to after the closure of Fredbear's. Although when William used the safe room to commit the MCI in 1985, all the safe rooms were discontinued in every building, and a false wall was built over the door of each. While it can be inferred from what we're told in this game, we learn in Tales from the Pizzaplex Epilogue 5 that these false walls didn't completely block access to the rooms, as they still allowed a hidden way to access them by simply pushing the door in from the outside, causing the lock to click and you to open the door. Although this means that if the door is somehow shut behind you, you definitely won't be able to reopen it from the inside and will be stuck forever. Either way, with this information in mind, Phone Dude and co then revisit the original Freddy's building to enter said safe room, where they end up finding Ralph's old tapes explaining the concept of said safe rooms, as well as how the two Springlocks suits, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, work, which we discussed in the first video of the miniseries, in order to help keep the other employees safe when using them, which is quite ironic in retrospect, because we later learn in the future game Secret of the Mimic that Ralph had actually been involved in a Springlock accident himself in the past. Quote, Ralph went to the hospital last night. That suit is going to be the death of one of us. Coming from mail that can be found in the theatre, and so is likely referring to the Captain Springlock suit, which seems to be reinforced with Nurse Dolly stating,
Poor Captain. Another Springlock failure? According to your records, this is not your first visit to the service hospital.
Also, Ralph working closely with the Captain's suit would somewhat explain why Ralph's favourite animatronic ends up being Foxy, since this would then mean he had always been working with and puppeteering Foxy in the puppet shows, growing an attachment to the character before he was even turned into an animatronic. But before we continue with what Phone Dude and co found alongside those training tapes, Secret of the Mimic also helps us answer a smaller mystery that also came from these very tapes, where within them Ralph states,
The company has deemed the suits temporarily unfit for employees. Until replacements arrive, you will be expected to wear the temporary costumes provided to you. Keep in mind that they were found on very short notice, so questions about appropriateness/relevance should be deflected.
which that final line is an odd detail to include, as it means these temporary costumes aren't random Bonnie or Chica suits or anything similar, but are instead characters that aren't publicly associated with and therefore not relevant to the Freddy's band. So what were those suited characters? Well, within Secret of the Mimic, we learned of a whole warehouse full of random character costumes, Murray's Costume Manor, which eventually got their entire catalogue acquired by Fazbear Entertainment themselves. But to narrow down which specific characters were used out of their entire catalogue, we can simply look at the prototype of the first Freddy's location. This prototype location featured Fredbear and Spring Bonnie prototypes hidden away in the back, while a random dog character Bub and alligator character Monty are used publicly alongside the original band, despite not not being relevant or appropriate Freddy's characters, this creating an identical scenario to these tapes, where Fredbear and Spring Bonnie are currently retired to the safe room, while costumes of random characters are used publicly alongside the band, despite not being relevant or appropriate Freddy's characters. Not only does the game create a similar scenario to hint at this, but the map shown down in this prototype location also just happens to be of the FNAF 3 Fazbear's Fright, which isn't how the building itself is designed at all, further hinting at all of this connecting together to solve this old FNAF 3 mystery. Speaking of that map though, and really quickly, I want to mention that I do think it's possible that this map wasn't just a meta lore hint for all of this, but was also further expanding onto the lore that this building layout was one of the design possibilities they had for the first Freddy's location that they obviously didn't go with. A design that the Fazbear's Fright team may have eventually found and then made into a reality to, like he mentions multiple times, make the place more authentic and
Feel legit, man.
But while Ralph's old tapes are full of interesting information about the safe rooms, the Springlocks suits, and temporary costumes, they aren't all Phone Dude and Co found left in the safe room, as elsewhere in the room they actually find a real animatronic, Spring Bonnie, a suit that's now moldy and withered with a literal dead body mixed within it, becoming what we know as Springtrap. We later learn the reason Springtrap is found in this state within the Follow Me minigames, that are unlocked after beating each night. Within, we learn that William had eventually returned to the Freddy's building, destroying the classic animatronics night by night, with a mysterious Shadow Freddy trying to lure them into the safe room to practically recreate the agony of the MCI itself. Although after destroying all of the animatronics, William returns one more night to seemingly collect his Spring Bunny suit, but is eventually cornered in the safe room by the souls of the 5 children, all projecting themselves to him, likely similar to how they do so in the movies. This causes him to rush to the Spring Bunny suit and put it on, getting eventually spring trapped within it due to the rain outside leaking in, and/or his heavy sweating from the initial stress, and/or his quick and sudden movements within the suit. Basically, it doesn't really matter which reason you pick, I honestly say all the above, but either way the Springlocks snap into place and trap his body within the suit forever. Since the ghosts are by the door, it's assumed that the ghosts then close the door on William so that, as we established earlier, he cannot possibly open it from the inside and is stuck within the room forever. Further hinted at with the FNAF movie showing the Golden Freddy spirit, who we just happen to play as in Follow Me 2, directly shut the door on William while he's still being springlocked. But wait, where in the timeline are we in these Follow Me minigames? Well, when you see the full map of the location, it quickly becomes clear that this is the 1993 location with the classic animatronics, left long abandoned after the story of FNAF 1 has occurred, judging by the rain leaking in from the torn roof and the rats running around the building. This is somewhat debated, so to solidify it, not only can we assume this from the location and its abandonment itself, but in the trailer leading up to the game, we actually saw the events of this minigame shown to us in 3D form, seen with the trailer stating, "He will come back, he always does," right before showing us newly rendered footage of the FNAF 1 characters waking up, before the next quote, "We have a place for him," which is then paired with the imagery of William being springtrapped. This trailer is literally the story of Follow Me. William comes to the FNAF 1 location like he has for every other location so far, and they now have a place for him to stay forever, trapped inside Spring Bunny. We also know that it's after FNAF 1, due to how we can see the same shells from the minigame now propped up around Fazbear's Fright, to explain where they ended up after the minigame. Just like this game shows us where the toys went after being scrapped and destroyed too, which is then reinforced with the final endings of the game showcasing these same classic shells being grouped together at the same spot, just like the minigame showed. It's important to note that we get the ending screen with all 5 shells lit right after finishing the minigame, where we, as Cassidy the 5th, walk past the 4 animatronic shells on the ground, which only those 4 are seen in the good ending that's achievable before this cutscene, furthering that they're indeed the same shells, and also that Golden Freddy was also destroyed with them, just off screen. This also explains why they never find any real animatronic until they find Springtrap. The toys were scrapped as we read about in FNAF 2, only leaving their shells behind just like we see in the game, and the FNAF 1 classics got destroyed in Follow Me, with their endos being taken out for future purposes. Also only leaving their shells behind just like we see in the game, but also like we read in the game's description too. There's other strong pieces of evidence that will be discussed in future videos that all require Follow Me to take place after FNAF 1. But for now, I think this is already enough to solidify it, and is why I mentioned it in the FNAF 1 video as well. Although some argue that the minigames could be prior to FNAF 1, with now fixed withers due to the animatronics having buttons. Something the classics don't have, and so in order to solidify this theory, we need to tackle this counterpoint. though it's important to note that the minigames within Scott's FNAF games are notoriously inconsistent when it comes to small details like the buttons. Without even exploring the other games, this very minigame shows us Spring Bonnie having no buttons at all, despite the Stage 01 minigame, the posters and location, and Springtrap himself all showing he has a button, which he still has as Scrap Trap in FNAF 6 as well. And that's without even talking about his illustration in FNAF 6, the FNAF movie, etc. Not only that, but this same minigame also features a Chica without a bib, despite no iteration of Chica in Scott's original story lacking a bib. Then if we simply jump back to FNAF 2 with the Save Them minigame, we can see that none of the characters who 100% have buttons in the gameplay itself have them there. Some may say those are examples of Scott not adding the buttons, not the opposite where Scott added them, to which I point you to the Fredbear plush in FNAF 4, who has 2 buttons despite 1, Fredbear not having any buttons in those same minigames, and 2, Sister Location showing us this very same plushie that doesn't actually have any buttons. But still not convinced that minigame inconsistency is enough to disprove this point? Well, in FNAF World, we see that the FNAF 1 classic animatronics randomly now have buttons despite never having them in FNAF 1 itself, nor at the 1985 location, shown more clearly with the teasers leading up to the game where the FNAF 1 characters literally turn into their buttoned-up adventure counterparts. Similarly, the Fazbear's Fright location itself shows the classics randomly with buttons as well on the posters, an inconsistency with the posters that actually gets later fixed within both the Survival Logbook and Into the Pit, with these exact same posters now featuring no buttons, like they should have in the first place. Not only that, but the Dead by Daylight description of Follow Me's events also calls the location abandoned, the building only ever being truly abandoned while the main 4 are on stage after FNAF 1. Although now we've established that the Follow Me minigames occur after FNAF 1, can we possibly get the exact year too? Well, while mostly speculation, for that we can look to the other timelines to try and get some hints, which within the Fazbear Fright series we get 2 stories that help us out a little. One is called The New Kid, where we read our protagonist going into an abandoned Freddy's location with the animatronics still intact, only to get himself springlocked, taking place sometime after 2010, due to referencing both Twilight, which released in 2008, and 127 Hours, which released in, well, 2010. Then the second story important to this discussion is called You're the Band, where we read how the animatronics are yet again still intact in an abandoned Freddy's location, where a Mike is the night guard and a shadow creature is recently lurking around, taking place 30 years after the MCI and so in the year 2015. With these 2 stories in mind, where the events of Follow Me have yet to take place, as well as both the movies having William springlocking take place in the 2000s, and also a very important theory that will be explored in the Help Wanted video, requiring it to take place in the 2010s as well, it seems almost definite that he gets springlocked years after FNAF 1. And likely in the 2010s, specifically sometime after or maybe even within 2015, which is actually quite neat considering that would mean that the MCI is basically being recreated 30 years after the event itself. So continuing on with the story, after William gets springtrapped in or after 2015, and as I went through in the FNAF 1 video, with the description of the game stating 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors, the source code teasers leading up to the game stating Five Nights at Freddy's 30 years later, FNAF 6 with HRY223, the survival logbook featuring an almost 30-year time skip between the 2 locations, the What We Found short story having everyone at Fazbear's Fright be aged 23, as well as all adaptations of Into the Pit requiring the game's events to happen after the year 2020 at minimum, we can successfully deduce that FNAF 3 takes place 30 years after the FNAF 1 Freddy's closed its doors in 1993, and therefore in the year 2023. I went into all that evidence and more in the FNAF 1 video itself, but some have argued that this game's full description stating 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors, the events that took place there have become nothing more than a rumor and a childhood memory, seems to be about the MCI, and so likely means that FNAF 3 takes place 30 years after the MCI closure itself, placing FNAF 3 in 2015 instead. Although without even adding on all our previous evidence, it should be noted that everyone, including me until now, has missed an important detail about this very description. It's directly referencing FNAF 1 itself through the newspaper within that game that states, quote, "After the tragedy that took place there many years ago, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza has announced that it will close by year's end, which is eerily similar wording to this game's description. The tragedy that took place there, the events that took place there, years after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza will close by year's end, said newspaper specifically being about the FNAF 1 location closing down, which remember is the same location that the MCI took place, directly proving that this game's description is simply placing the game 30 years after the FNAF 1 closure, while the rumours mentioned within it are still about the MCI anyways, since it all happened there at the same location. With this in mind, as well as all the other evidence from the previous video and another big piece of evidence that we'll discuss later when talking about the endings of the game, it seems that FNAF 3 indeed takes place 30 years after the first game itself, and so in the year of the rabbit 2023. So within 2023, the main gameplay then starts, and after Phone Dude and co find Springtrap immobile, they take him to Fazbear's Fright. Judging by his Dead by Daylight description, it appears that William then only reawakens in the building after we, the player, play the sounds of children's laughter. That's right, his urge to kill kids literally powers him to awaken and move again. Quote, he awoke to a familiar sound, his body a pillar of agony. The urge to kill lingered within him still, the thirst long left unquenched. The sound filled his ears again, children's laughter. Springtrap rose to his feet, adjusting to his new body, and marched towards the sounds. Which his lust for blood basically keeping him alive and determined is directly reinforced in FNAF 6, with Henry stating,
"Your lust for blood has driven you in endless circles, chasing the cries of children in some unseen chamber, always seeming so near, yet somehow out of reach."
We'll talk more about William's exact motivations through all of these games in the future videos, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss them. However, Springtrap isn't the only threat in this game, as we also encounter the Phantom Animatronics. These phantoms are hallucinations that appear with a random chance when in the office and or selecting a new camera, which if you realize them by looking at them for too long, they'll jump scare you and cause your ventilation to malfunction. As you probably know by now, they're all burnt and green versions of multiple animatronics from the first and second game. But what actually are they, and why do they occur to the player? The game doesn't tell us much about them at all, and the teasers leading up to the game's release only told us that they're all in your mind, which doesn't help much either. Although heading to the Fazbear Frights book series, we can look to a story called What We Found, where we read of an alternate universe version of FNAF 3. To recap, Springtrap gets delivered to Fazbear's Fright and is put up on a wall. The night guard Hudson eventually touching the flesh on him, unsure what it was at first, but as soon as he does so, he begins to hallucinate things pulled from his memories, such as his teacher's voice, his ex's voice, his childhood bedroom, his stepdad's abuse, etc. Not only that, but the props in the building come to life too, such as random statues singing, the heads of multiple animatronics, and even a Chica head that was still attached to a part of her body. Note, this is not Phantom Chica, and it's directly referred to as simply just a piece of an animatronic. But either way, he continues to be hunted by heads and props moving impossibly, as well as his memories from his past, before hiding inside of an oven that locks and begins burning up. So with that story in mind, and noting that things will be slightly different in the game's timeline, it appears that the Phantom animatronics are born from Springtrap's reawakening, likely his agony, which can be visually represented with the black liquid over the bodies of all the phantoms, just like we see the agony Pit Trap has at the end of Into the Pit as an example, and how they also look somewhat similar to the Shadow animatronics with their black features and white glowing eyes. This idea is actually backed up within the game itself, with the phantoms only appearing from the same night that Springtrap arrives in the building, even sharing similar looking eyes to him. These hallucinations then specifically take the form visually and audibly from the memories that belong to the guard's past, meaning if we're encountering phantoms of both the FNAF 1 and FNAF 2 animatronics, then we must be playing as a guard who has memories from and was at both the FNAF 1 and FNAF 2 location. That's right, good old Mike is back yet again. We'll talk about that more in a moment, but we even see Springtrap being able to move around the pre-placed props in the building in FNAF 3, similar to the short story 2 with Mr. Cupcake for Paper Pals, posters swapping around, etc. The short story was explaining both the phantoms that seem real and act alive, as well as the random Easter eggs of items that are real yet aren't alive. Some have argued that the phantoms come from the props themselves and not the memories of the guard, but as I mentioned in the What We Found summary, none of the phantoms from FNAF FNAF 3 actually appear in that short story, since the guard has no memories of those animatronics. The hallucinations he has don't suddenly make the props gain full animatronic and bird-looking forms, and they instead stay as they are, props, albeit now controlled by Springtrap. Not only that, but this option also wouldn't explain Phantom Freddy, who is actually the phantom version of withered Golden Freddy's model, his hallucination even being called Golden Freddy in the files, which there's no prop of Golden Freddy in the location whatsoever. So now we know the phantoms come from the memories of Mike, let's actually talk about Mike's return in itself, where yes, I truly believe that we play as Mike in every single gameplay section in Scott's original story, from FNAF 1 all the way to the finale, FNAF 6. But without just the explanation of the phantoms. Do we have any more evidence that Mike is the FNAF 3 guard? Well, luckily for us, we do. Mainly by turning to what I honestly call the most important book in all of FNAF lore, the survival logbook. On the first page of the logbook, we're told that Mike is the one writing within it, and while there's some innocent puzzles, arts and crafts, and more, there's multiple clues hiding throughout that help solve the lore as a whole. As we talked about in the FNAF 1 video, this is where we got the name of the Golden Freddy spirit, Cassidy, as well as the name for Mike's younger brother, the Crying Child, which we'll explore more in the next video. But either way, having Mike, Cassidy, and the Crying Child all writing throughout the logbook poses an interesting question. Is this logbook in-universe? It appears so, with 3 in-universe characters writing within it. And while the answer to that question isn't the crux of what we're about to talk about, I did want to take this opportunity to say that no matter if it's in-universe or meta for the audience, the evidence provided within is equally as strong, and all the clues/hints provided are just as important regardless. It being in or out of universe doesn't change that. So back to the logbook, and around the middle of every night we get coupons for a Freddy's establishment, which we talked about in the previous video. But on night 4's coupon, Mike writes an interesting note. For real value, see page 61. And by turning to page 61, we immediately see 3 numbers. A 5 plus 4 and then a 3 off to the side, which we can conclude is for us to then multiply the 9 by 3 to get us a total and the real value of $27. But why does this matter? Well, this means that the $16 coupon is currently inflated to and worth $27 when Mike is writing in it. If we assume the coupon comes from the last Freddys in 1993, since not only do we calculate the real value using a 9 and a 3, aka 93, but the book itself features the toys, referencing them in the coupons themselves, the nightmares, and the fun times, meaning it must take place after everything. And so then the year that $16 in 1993 inflates to $27 is 2017. The exact year that the logbook was released in real life, and creating an almost 3-decade time skip between these dates, referencing the theorized 3-decade time gap between the dates of FNAF 1 and FNAF 3. So it appears that Scott used the maximum inflation at the time, aka the value in that year he wrote it in, to get across to us that Mike is writing within this logbook in modern day, and so at the end of the timeline. And so not only does this logbook double down on the idea that FNAF 3 takes place 30 years after FNAF 1, and so in 2023, but it also tells us that this book is the Fazbear's Fright team parodying a Freddy's logbook, similar to how the whole location is parodying a Freddy's location, meaning that Mike is writing within it during his shifts at FNAF 3. This idea then makes complete sense of the imagery shown at the end of every single night after the first. The Fazbear's Fright office. Same desk, same giant windows, same posters, same box full of toy animatronic shells, and the same single open door on the left. Although that's not all that's interesting with this imagery, as on the first night's page we specifically see Foxy, who represents the night guard, reading a newspaper, which is how the first games always start, one that specifically reads Screws, Bolts, and Hairpins, a newspaper's name that originates from Sister Location. When Hand Unit questions where Mike heard about the job, quote,
"Whether you were approached at a job fair, read our ad in Screws, Bolts, and Hairpins, or if this is the result of a dare, we welcome you."
This imagery in itself implies that the Foxy guard shown on each page is meant to be Mike, which makes sense considering FNAF 4 directly shows Mike wearing a Foxy mask, being the stronger and easier connection, as well as the fact that Foxy is representing the night guard of a logbook that's literally owned by Mike anyways. So where is Foxy, who is Mike, then shown to be a night guard at with the imagery featured at the start of every night? That's right, Fazbear's Fright, meaning Mike is the player of FNAF 3. This is also hinted at with the next logbook-esque book, Ticket to Fun, being a collection of memorabilia focused on the history of the Freddy's locations. that outright shows us gameplay of FNAF 1, as well as features a Mike Schmidt name drop to imply that this collection is set after FNAF 1 itself, which to me, alongside the FNAF 3 references within, all screams a collection made for Fazbear's Fright, making sense of this poster that's outright seen put up in Fazbear's Fright being used within this book first, this creating an eerily similar situation to the Survivor logbook, someone making a collection of stuff from Fazbear's past, with Mike's name written within it after the fact, that then seemingly takes place around FNAF 3. Not only that, but that same page with the poster from FNAF 3 just happens to end the paragraph with "You're not just an employee, you're family," to further tie it all together. There's smaller evidence within the logbook itself to deduce that it takes place later in the timeline, with references to Happiest Day from this very game, modern Apple laptops, dabbing, etc., but that's not all for the bigger evidence, as the logbook also features Mike, who we just theorized is going through FNAF 3, writing about the events of Sister Location as if it already happened, meaning Sister Location must take place prior to FNAF 3. This is huge, as the final cutscene in Sister Location, specifically the Custom Night, reveals to us that after the game's events, Mike audibly vows to find his father no matter what, making it his personal and final goal. And we then visually see the fire at Fazbear's Fright, which we learn about at the end of FNAF 3 with a newspaper telling us that the place was burnt to the ground, never getting to open, and quote, "Authorities have not ruled out foul play," which was almost definitely caused by foul play. As a side note, this fire also explains to us how we, the reader, get the logbook, as we also read that anything found to have survived the fire gets resold at a public auction, meaning the logbook simply got sold to us. But either way, the major debate when it comes to this speech was whether it was showing us Mike's goal coming to fruition, meaning Mike is the guard at FNAF 3, or if it was showing us William has already escaped the fire by the time of the speech, meaning Mike wasn't the guard at FNAF 3. The logbook is then actually giving us the answer to that. Mike's already experienced the events of Sister Location while currently writing during his FNAF 3 shifts, meaning we were visibly seeing the result of his speech and new goal, meaning he was the FNAF 3 guard, along with a hint that his plan didn't end up working as intended as Springtrap survived, leaving Henry to personally take it into his hands in the upcoming FNAF 6. This was also seemingly confirmed by Scott himself prior to the cutscene's release, with a quote, "When the final cutscene is ready, I will give Very Hard Mode a little more juice to help dedicated players make it to 6 AM. Then we can finally see what becomes of Eggs Benedict. Then our story can be complete," meaning at the time, the story would be completed with this cutscene, which allows us to visually see what becomes of Mike after Sister Location's events, causing the fire at Fazbear's Fright. The OST for this speech is then even called Demolition Inevitable, a hint that the building's demolition and the fire was inevitable, since Mike was on his hunt to find and end his father's evil for good. Not only that, but the short story What We Found further implies Mike was the one who set the fire, as when Hudson begins burning to death in the oven, he specifically recalls that it was him who set fire to his family in the past and killed his stepfather. That's right, the guard in FNAF 3, Mike, is the one who set fire to his family's house, Fazbear's Fright, burning his current father, Springtrap, in the process. This connection can then be further proven with the fact that in the story, Springtrap has a variety of memories and voices to choose from. But the one time Springtrap is seen speaking, he literally speaks using the voice of Hudson's stepfather, to further connect the two together. Two fathers who got burnt in fires set by the Fright Guard. But this whole situation sounds awfully familiar to something else from the future game, Sister Location, where we're presented with a TV show called The Immortal and the Restless. In it, we watch as a father who seemingly represents William, continuously abandoned looking after his child, saying that it's not really his, which eventually ends up with their house being set on fire by the mother Clara, who interestingly in the survival logbook is the one character that Mike specifically states he relates to the most. So alongside the fact that right after that fire is revealed in the show, the very next scene states,
"Tune in tomorrow for the exciting conclusion."
Between the two, similar to FNAF 3's fire leading directly to FNAF 6, the finale between Mike and William, this seems to all be further hinting at Mike indeed being the guard who sets the fire. After all, it would make sense if he relates to Clara to then use one of her ideas. Why are all the phantoms already burnt? Well, if the phantoms are memories pulled from Mike, then it's possible that instead of just being plain foreshadowing, or the simple explanation of it representing agony, it's actually pulling the memories of the Immortal and the Restless, and manifesting the fire as a possibility to Mike after Phone Dude even says they're hoping
"It doesn't catches on fire."
and that
some of this equipment is barely functional. Yeah, I wasn't joking about the fire. That's a real risk.
Mike's mind is basically screaming at him to do the same thing, which then leads him to, well, do the same thing. But speaking of the future games, this is also one of the only 2 games in the entire franchise where it's not explicitly told to us who the player is within the game itself in any way, shape, or form, implying that we are able to figure it out ourselves. Scott even stating that the community uncovered all of the lore from this game, and that every question in FNAF was definitively answerable at the time of FNAF 4, which both would include the identity of FNAF 3's guard. But coincidentally, the only other game this occurs in is FNAF 6, where using a variety of evidence, we also come to the same conclusion that an unnamed guard we're playing as is actually Mike as well. Back again. The exact same situation. This is without even mentioning the FNAF movie universe, where we literally see Mike vs Spring Bunny, which concluded with the building sparking up and collapsing similar to FNAF 3, with the third movie confirmed to have it be Mike vs Springtrap, with the Phantom Animatronics involved. As always, there's more evidence in the upcoming videos that further prove Mike is the FNAF 3 guard, similar to how I said there was more evidence Mike was Fritz Smith back in the FNAF 2 video, which we've gone through some of that now, since this theory means Mike must have seen the FNAF 2 animatronics to see them as phantoms. But just like that video, I think all of this is already enough to conclude that Mike is indeed the FNAF 3 guard. Before we move on from identity talk though, and what about the phone dude? Do we know anything else about him? Well, interestingly enough, in what we found we read about Hudson talking to other employees of Fazbear's Fright, and one of those employees, Dwayne, bears a striking resemblance to the phone dude in multiple ways, mainly with his continuously unserious attitude, the fact he's quote always telling really bad dad jokes, his slang, and more clearly with how he is the one to introduce certain things to the guard of the location, like Phone Dude does in this game. For example, when they get the shipment of boxes to unpack, Hudson asks them what's inside, and Dwayne responds, "Come and see, it's going to be mind-blowing. You won't believe where this was found. Get this was found inside a hidden room in one of the pizzerias. You have to come and see this thing. It is creep-tastic," which sounds exactly like the sort of things that the Phone Dude was saying within his calls. Dwayne even pretends to be a fuzzy yellow-armed zombie, which actually references the first night's call where he says,
"Do we may have to suit you up in a furry suit and make you walk around saying, boo?"
as well as stating that the place smells like something's burning, referencing Phone Dude's warnings about a fire occurring. The whole story literally being called What We Found is even directly referencing Phone Dude saying,
"We found one."
Some may say that the second movie may actually give us his real name instead, Ethan, due to the character stating, "I think I found one, I think I found a real one," which is similar to Phone Dude's voice line in FNAF 3.
"We found one. A real one."
But in all fairness, Patrick states, come on, they want the authentic thing, the authentic Fazbear experience, which is also quite similar to Phone Dude's lines about making it
Feel really authentic.
and making
Just feel legit, man.
So since What We Found was giving us hints and clues about FNAF 3 specifically, and has a story full of characterization, while the movie has 3 characters filling in the Phone Dude's role for this one little scene, I believe that for now we can possibly carry over Dwayne as the proper name for the Phone Dude. But now we know who everyone is, where in the timeline we are, and what happened that led us to this point in the story, it's time to talk about the infamous 8-bit minigames hidden throughout the game, and answer the big question: which ending is the canon ending? Basically, if you don't play any minigames and just play the game normally, you get the bad ending, showcasing all 5 children are still restless and active. However, after playing each of the hidden minigames and delivering cake to all of the secret children hiding throughout them, you then unlock an extra minigame, Happiest Day. Within this minigame, you play as the puppet, more accurately Charlie, walking past some other random kids seemingly enjoying their parties, which really quickly, these other kids aren't dead and or other spirits, hinted at with the fact that they're in color, aka alive, while our main kids are grayscaled, aka dead. And at the time of the game's release, we can assume that their random masks were meant to just represent that Fazbear Entertainment had other locations and characters than the ones that we saw within the games themselves. But now, thanks to the future games, we can potentially line up each kid's mask to an actual character. The green mask is for the green alligator Monty, take note of its longer snout, so it's not Happy Frog. The pink mask is for the pink pig, either Lasso Pig or Pig Patch. The purple mask is for the purple hippo, either Jugband Hippo or Mr. Hippo. The blue mask is harder to pinpoint, but it might be for either the blue lyrical lemur or Endo Woof. And the orange mask is of course for the Orange Orville elephant. But after passing these random 5 kids, she then sees the 4 MCI spirits with their masks on, seemingly waiting for the Golden Freddy child before the party can begin. The puppet then delivers the final cake, and the Golden Freddy spirit opens their eyes and puts on their mask. Then all 6 of the children are finally allowed to rest, their spirits disappearing while their masks then fall to the ground and their 6 balloons rise into the sky, signifying that they're moving on to the afterlife. We then get the good ending screen simply reading the end, with all of the animatronic lights finally off, this being the end of their story. So which ending is canon? Well, interestingly, in Scott's interview with Dorco, he's asked that exact question, to which he replied,
"The answer is very interesting. The answer is complex."
Which wouldn't make too much sense if the answer was a simple this ending is canon, this ending isn't. So keeping that in mind, and in the future games we also learn that these 6 don't necessarily move on after FNAF 3. For example, without even going into theory territory too deeply, we clearly see that the puppet is still active and around in FNAF 6. So it seems that the reason the answer is complex is because it's not one or the other. Both endings are canon. Basically, timeline-wise, the bad ending occurs canonically after FNAF 3, where the spirits continue to be active and involved in the story. Meanwhile, the good ending occurs canonically after FNAF 6 and Ultimate Custom Night, only when the spirits are all put to rest. This is hinted at in multiple ways, but one of the biggest pieces of evidence is the fact that in order to tie the names of the MCI gravestones to their respective animatronics in FNAF 6, we had to pair their graves with their animatronic shells from the good ending specifically, which turned out to be the correct way to deduce these names, working perfectly with the ending occurring after the fire and both scenes representing the children finally at rest. Not only that, but Henry even states in FNAF 6 that Charlie and everyone she helped carry in her arms can now be put to rest, and that he believes there's peace to come to them after the fire is done, both signifying that Happiest Day happens after the final fire. This all even gets seemingly reiterated in Ultimate Custom Night, where we get some interesting voice lines, but one specifically from Charlie who states,
"The others are under my protection. I don't hate you, but you need to stay out of my way."
Which directly implies that Charlie is actively doing something during the events of that game, aka helping put Happiest Day together for the children, which all have hints of being around and involved in that game as well, that we'll explain more in that game's video. It makes sense of why the final cutscene in the game, Void, showcasing Golden Freddy twitching away into the darkness, just happens to then share a musical motif with Alchemist Fantasy, which is played during the security puppet minigame which leads to Charlie's death. Charlie is overseeing the events of the game before getting them all to finally rest. To further solidify it, in Security Breach's Superstar Daycare, there's a ton of party rooms, one of which being a lot more interesting than the others, featuring balloons that say Yay 40, which corresponds to the room's whiteboard stating that this is someone's 40th birthday. Yeah, a 40-year-old is having their birthday in the daycare? What? This has made people believe this room to be somewhat important, somehow, some way, and theorists have tried to figure out what it could mean. However, I think the answer to what this room is was right in front of us the whole time. This room features 5 chairs for 5 guests, the 5th at the head of the table having their cake. Although so far only 4 of them have shown up as shown with the party hats, and only 4 animatronics being in the room, which makes sense when you notice that the room's whiteboard only states that there's 4 guests in the party. Although why is then there a 5th guest who is even the one who actually gets the cake? To me, that alone made it click in my head that this room seems to be a parallel to the party of Happiest Day. The 4 guests have arrived, the animatronics representing their masks, while the 5th, who isn't wearing a mask and isn't a part of the party at first, eventually joins onto the party at the head of the table and receives their cake. The reason I'm talking about this now though is the fact that this room has the party being celebrated 40 years after something. Well, interestingly enough, 40 years after 1983, the year that both Charlie and the crying child die, just happens to point us to 2023, the same year that we've just been establishing that FNAF 3, FNAF 6, Ultimate Custom Night, and Happiest Day all take place, the year that these children get to rest. So to conclude, we can deduce that both of these endings are canon, but just at different points in time. So yes, despite the story extending past this point and pushing this event further down in the timeline, the good ending screen is still true as it still is the end of the original story. Although now comes the bigger issue, as you probably know. Within the future games, it's heavily implied that the crying child is also within Golden Freddy as a second spirit, which we'll talk more in depth about why that's believed in the next video all about FNAF 4, so make sure to subscribe for that. So then, who is this Golden Freddy spirit shown in Happiest Day? Not only that, but no matter who this is, where is the other then? Well, considering this minigame is meant to be showing us 4 of the MCI children alongside Charlie, I do think that the 5th kid group with the other 4 would very simply be Cassidy, the 5th MCI, which would make sense with the fact that it's always been the 5 MCI and Charlie as the group of 6 throughout the entire series, the crying child never being in a group. This is also reiterated with the memory dolls in Help Wanted 2, sharing a similar design to the spirits within this minigame, blank bodies with only masked faces tied to 6 gravestones, which considering the bunny memory is called Jeremy, meaning they are representing the MCI children, and the bunny mask collected after having the other memories seemingly represents the Bite of 83, and so separates the crying child from that group, it seems that the Golden Freddy mask character there is also meant to be Cassidy and not the crying child, to further hint at the same being true in FNAF 3. Cassidy being the cake receiver also makes sense with the fact that the gravestones, which directly connect to the Happiest Day ending, are of Charlie and the 5 MCI, as remember that's how we start the hunt for Cassidy's name, directly implying it's those 6 that we're seeing be put to rest in the minigame, corresponding to how the good ending screen has all 5 lights turned off now, to directly imply all 5 are put to rest at the same time. This would also make sense with how Happiest Day is a direct reverse of Give Gifts, Give Life, with the masks now being taken off the MCI spirits instead of being put on them. Cassidy being the cake receiver is then further hinted at outside of the games too, such as within the survival logbook where we get the imagery of a girl with black hair being handed a cake by the puppet, directly referencing Happiest Day with the page prompt then confirming to be true, which this imagery then correlates to Return to the Pit featuring a party for the 5 MCI, representing Happiest Day, where the final kid to get a slice of cake just happens to be a girl with curly hair, being the only cake delivery whose receiver is actually described, as if it's important to know, the book even showing an illustration of the girl that bears a striking resemblance to the logbook girl, which this then further correlates to the 4th closet, where the girl literally named Cassidy just happens to be the final child to be put back together and become whole. Quote, "There," Michael cheered, momentarily distracting Susie from trying to leave. The last phantom of the girl with long black hair came and sat with them. When she had merged with the others like her, she blinked, then looked up and took in a long, calm breath. "We're all together now," Michael said with a smile. The drawings on the ground had disappeared, and 5 real-seeming children sat with Cawthon under the table, no longer ghostly images. This event leaving those 5 MCI children to be put to rest. So with 3 places directly having a girl be the final spirit put to rest alongside the others, 2 having her be given cake last, and the other literally having it be Cassidy herself, the group of 6 always being the 5 MCI and Charlie, including the graves that correlate to this very ending, as well as the minigame being the reverse of Give Gifts, Give Life, which features the MCI specifically, it seems pretty simple that Cassidy is the Golden Freddy spirit who gets given the final piece of cake in Happiest Day. But then what happens to the crying child? Why is the layout of the Happiest Day minigame a direct reverse of the layout of Fredbear's Family Diner in the following game? And why is the party celebrating 40 years as if the party is indeed his from 1983? Well, what if I told you that the crying child not being the receiver of the final cake alongside the MCI and Charlie doesn't mean he isn't still a part of Happiest Day? How? Well, turning to the Fazbear Frights books once again, man, these things are helpful and I'm beyond glad Scott specifically said to use these to fill in the blanks of the story. But either way, we read within the epilogues about an animatronic called the Stitch Wraith that contains 2 spirits, Jake and Andrew, and we read that when one of the spirits, Jake, thinks about an extremely positive memory from his childhood, he quote, began to feel as if he was being sucked out of the thing he was in. He could feel himself being pulled into the memory itself. Jake realized he could easily relax into this wonderful memory and allow the whole of who he was to be extracted from the animatronic that contained him and Andrew, although he instead decides to stay for Andrew and snaps out of what was happening. Although later in the epilogues, the memory returns to Jake's consciousness, and this time he begins to tell Andrew to take his hand, bringing an external spirit over into his memory. While the 2 get pulled down at first by William for story reasons, eventually, quote, as soon as Jake released his memory, the creature shifted its attention to Jake. Jake felt the creature claw at him. It felt like he was being mauled and pummeled by a force filled with a never-ending need to inflict pain. but he didn't give into it. Throwing everything he had into his effort and drawing on the power of his memory, Jake turned himself into a massive bat of intention, and he swung away, knocking Andrew loose from the evil that held him. Andrew, suddenly free, was sucked away and he vanished. Jake then continues to go victim to victim, using his memory powers to alter their memories into a strong positive memory to allow their souls to finally rest. So this, alongside the constant repetition throughout the franchise that mentions memories can be altered and changed for the spirits, changing their entire motivations at times, as well as the fact that within the novel trilogy the spirits are freed after pieces of their memories are finally put back together, I believe that what we see in Happiest Day is the memory of the crying child's birthday party that was altered into a positive memory and is now used to allow the other children to rest. Jake giving the person he shares the Stitch Wraith with his memory in order to free him directly mirrors how this theory would mean the crying child has given the person he shares Golden Freddy with his memory in order to free her. We even see this within FNAF World, where someone being told they would be put back together just like the crying child was told, eventually has pieces laid out for them, which are even shown to be the FNAF 3 minigames, and so the memories, being told to find them and then allow himself to rest. Then in FNAF 3 we see Charlie using and giving out these altered memories to allow the MCI and herself to rest too. This is even hinted at with the 3 different levels of glitches within the FNAF 3 minigames. The red area having a slashed crying child, aka the crying child, then the black and white area with a giant tree, aka Charlie whose gravestone is alongside a tree, and then finally the blue area with the 5 shadow cupcakes, aka the 5 missing children. All 7 characters are involved in this process, but just in their 3 different ways. I also believe that the second review was hinting at this too, with how the music box, a positive memory for Charlie, helps calm her spirit and put her to sleep. Happiest Day simply being a larger and more emotionally charged memory to help them all to sleep and permanently. This is also all further hinted at throughout each of the FNAF 3 minigames with something that I haven't seen anyone notice yet. In order to unlock the Happiest Day minigame, you must first complete Balloon Boy's air adventure, get the cake from Mangle's quest, then head back to BB's air adventure to give out a slice of cake, then give more cake in Chica's party, Stage 01, Glitch, and then finally Happiest Day. Then recently in the Ultimate Guide 2.0, we read about a Chica secret party, a fake game created just for the guide that connects Chica's party to Midnight Motorist. But why? This is when it all clicked. Let's head back to Mangle's quest for a second and actually take a look at the minigame instead of just skipping past it. We can see that for some reason there's windows in the background, one showing a moon, meaning that we're inside some place looking out. Then within Chica's party we see that the windows are now yellow, aka admitting light, with nothing visible within, implying we're now outside looking in. So what if we assume that we're literally in and out of the same house throughout these minigames, as symbolic as they are? But which one? Well, if you've played FNAF 4, you'd know that within the right hallway we see a lamp, for light of course, and 2 3x2 windows, creating similar imagery to Chica's party. And then there's the plush trap hallway upstairs, where we can see a window looking outside to the stars that is then 2x2, just like Mangle's quest. So what if we're in the Afton house in these minigames, aka memories? Well, this would then actually be backed up with a mysterious Chica's secret party that directly connects the minigame to the Midnight Motorist and therefore William Afton's house. The image that does so featuring Chica outside looking in, just like the FNAF 3 minigame. Once that clicked, all of the pieces then fell into place. Think of it like this. In order, excluding the first non-important round of BB's air adventure, Mangle's quest has us going from the outside, note the clouds in the sky, into the Afton house, where inside someone with a grin is running around, representing the older brother Mike. The player avatar being Mangle is then a reference to the oddly Mangle-styled Foxy toy who just happens to be inside the house in FNAF 4. Then BB's air adventure has us go back outside, the player avatar being Balloon Boy, then representing the first kid we see outside in FNAF 4, a Balloon Boy styled kid. Then Chica's party has us traveling outside of the house further, going past 4 extra kids, representing the 4 extra kids that are close together outside. The player avatar being Toy Chica is then a reference to the Chica toy outside the house, who, if you remember, lacks a beak to specifically be representing Toy Chica. Then Stage 01 has us going inside Fredbear's family diner as further seen in FNAF 4, with a child eventually disappearing from the party, representing the bite of 83 at Fredbear's, where a child who should be enjoying their party gets their life taken away. We have now created and gone through his saddest and final day, but then the glitch minigame has us going through all of these past minigames, representing Charlie going through all of these memories, and likely more, to alter them one by one into positive memories and clear the agony attached. Of course represented by the player avatar being the literal agony creature. Then finally, Happiest Day represents what happens once all of those pieces, the memories, are put back together in one, to create the powerful and emotionally charged memory that is now his happiest day instead. Freedom. And so once Charlie has altered his memories, the crying child is able and even instructed to rest as seen in FNAF World. Then as we see in FNAF 3, Charlie is able to make his happiest day be shared to all of the MCI and herself, allowing them all to rest together. This is even hinted at with the fact that the cake they get in Happiest Day is grayscaled, just like their spirits. While in every other minigame and even on the tables in the same minigame, the cake is always colored. This is not a real cake, it's not a real party, it's not a real memory. It's a fake that's been crafted for them all, to finally rest. There's more evidence for this theory in a very surprising place that we'll talk about in the FNAF 4 video, as well as more to Chica's secret party in the FNAF 6 video, but basically everyone's saying that the crying child got freed with a Happiest Day memory, and everyone's saying that Cassidy got freed with a Happiest Day memory, are both correct. This one day, this one memory was the powerful and emotionally strong memory that, now altered and cleared of its agony, helps free the MCI, Charlie, and the crying child in one fell swoop. So after all of that, we can solidify for my final timeline that besides what we're directly told / shown, Fazbear's Fright never actually opened. The safe rooms are still accessible and relockable despite being turned into a false wall, solving the safe room paradox. That the temporary costumes mentioned back in 1983 are from Murray's Costume Manor. That the Follow Me minigames definitely take place after FNAF 1. That the phantoms are born from Springtrap himself and take the form of the guard's memories. That the random items teleporting around / the Easter eggs are also Springtrap's doing. That the unnamed guard is Mike back again. Further proof that FNAF 3 takes place 30 years after FNAF 1 and so in 2023. That sister location must occur before FNAF 3, keep in mind for future videos. That the Happiest Day cake receiver is Cassidy. And that all of the minigames are showing us that Charlie is altering the extremely emotional, powerful memories from the crying child into positive memories to help free the MCI on herself, the crying child resting in the process. So with every aspect of FNAF 3 answered, we can now move on to the big one, FNAF 4, to try and solve everything within it, coming next month. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. A big shout out to all of my channel members, become one today. Please be respectful to everyone when discussing what are simply theories, and I really hope you all enjoyed and have a great day / night. Bye!